was one of those storms that came out of nowhere. One minute the Nevada desert was quiet and calm, the air dry and warm. Then suddenly the sky darkened and the wind began howling across the barren land. A torrential downpour hit without warning, and the lightning cracked through the sky, turning night into day. My wife Rachel and I were driving down Route 65 on our way to Vegas when the storm came barreling in. I wasn't too worried at first. I've been through storms before, but this one felt different. The rain was coming down so hard that my wipers couldn't keep up. The visibility was almost zero, and the road was slipping away beneath us. "I think we should pull over," Rachel said, her voice edged with anxiety. I agreed. I spotted a small dirt patch on the side of the road and slowed down, steering the car off the highway. We sat there in silence for a while, listening to the rain hammer against the roof, the wind battering the car. The desert was eerily quiet outside. No signs of life, just the fury of the storm. Minutes later, my eyes caught something in the distance. At first, I thought it was more lightning. But no, it was lights. Two bright beams cutting through the rain. A vehicle was heading our way. "Do you see that?" I asked Rachel, my voice tense. She leaned forward, squinting through the rain. "Yeah, I see it. What is that?" I didn't have a good feeling about it. The headlights were getting closer, cutting through the storm with an almost unnatural steadiness. It wasn't a random vehicle just passing by. It was heading straight for us. I locked the doors, my hand shaking as I did. Rachel was already staring out the window, her eyes wide with concern. "What should we do?" she asked. "We stay put. Just stay quiet," I whispered, though I could feel the weight of unease growing. The vehicle came into full view. It was a Jeep, an old one, rugged and weathered. It slowed as it approached, stopping about 50 feet from our car. The headlights illuminated the rain-soaked desert floor, casting long shadows. I could see movement inside the Jeep. 4 men. They climbed out slowly, almost casually, and began walking toward us. Rachel's grip tightened on her seat. "What do they want?" I didn't answer. I couldn't because I didn't know, but I knew something wasn't right. They were walking toward us with a calmness that didn't sit well with me. They were deliberate, like they had all the time in the world. One of the men walked toward the driver's side, another toward the back of the car, while the other 2 moved toward the front. My heart raced, but I kept my voice steady. "Lock the doors, Rachel. Don't make a sound." She nodded quickly, locking her side as I did mine. I kept my eyes on the men as they moved around the car, their movements slow but purposeful. I could hear their boots crunching against the gravel, the wind howling around us. But I didn't dare take my eyes off them. One of the men raised something. Was it a gun? Without warning, I heard a loud bang, the gunshots splitting through the storm like thunder. The shot echoed in the night, and for a split second, I thought I was going to lose my mind. "Stay down, Rachel," I whispered urgently. She was already ducking low, clutching her phone. I grabbed mine and quickly dialed 911, my fingers trembling. 911, what's your emergency?" The operator's voice came through. "There are 4 men outside my car. They're armed and they're trying to break in. We're on Route 65, about 20 miles outside of town. Please send help. They've got guns." I could barely hear the operator's response over the storm, but I heard the reassurance that help was on the way. I kept my eyes locked on the men as they continued to circle the car. They didn't seem in any hurry. They were taking their time. They seemed almost amused, like this was some kind of game to them. Rachel gripped my hand, but I didn't say anything. I couldn't. There was nothing I could say to make her feel better. All we could do was wait. The men were now on all sides of the car, stopping by the windows, their shadows dancing on the rain-soaked glass. One of them tried the driver's door handle. I held my breath, but the door stayed locked. And then, without warning, the Jeep engine roared to life. The headlights flashed once more, blinding us for a moment before the vehicle sped off, its tires kicking up gravel and dirt as it disappeared into the storm. The men scattered into the night, vanishing without a trace. I didn't waste any time. The moment I was sure they were gone, I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The 911 operator had stayed on the line, and when I heard the sirens in the distance, I knew help was close. When the police arrived, they listened to my story without much reaction. "It's not uncommon out here," one of the officers said casually. "People get stranded or caught in the storm. They sometimes end up in these parts." But the thing was, there were no tracks, no tire marks, no sign of the Jeep. The officers searched the area for hours but found nothing. Rachel and I left without any answers, but the feeling of unease never went away. Every time we passed that stretch of highway, I kept my eyes peeled, half expecting to see the headlights again, cutting through the rain, coming straight for us. Who were they? What did they want? And why did they leave so suddenly, without a trace? Life wasn't going the way I thought it would. A few months ago, I finalized my divorce, and to say I was struggling would be an understatement. Everything felt out of place, like I was moving through the world, but not really living in it. I decided to take a long drive down Route 66, the iconic highway that seemed to stretch endlessly through the heart of America, hoping it might clear my head. Somewhere between Flagstaff, Arizona, and Albuquerque, New Mexico, I pulled into a small coffee shop called Desert Brew. It was a quiet, unassuming place, the kind that feels frozen in time. The bell above the door jingled softly as I walked in, the smell of fresh coffee and pastries filling the air. I ordered a black coffee and took a seat by the window, staring out at the empty highway as the rain began to fall in soft, steady droplets. That's when I noticed her. She walked in with an air of casual confidence. She wasn't trying to draw attention. Jeans, a loose sweater, her hair tied back in a messy bun, but there was something magnetic about her. She went straight to the counter, ordered a cappuccino, and stood off to the side as she waited, scrolling through her phone. I told myself to focus on my coffee, but my eyes kept drifting back to her. Then, something unexpected happened. As she turned to leave with her cup, she stumbled slightly, the coffee tilting dangerously to one side. Without thinking, I stood up and caught the cup before it could spill. "Whoa, close call," I said, managing a nervous smile. She looked up at me, her eyes warm and filled with a mix of surprise and gratitude. "Yeah, thanks. Guess I'm a little more graceful in my head," she said with a soft laugh. "It happens to the best of us," I said, feeling a spark of something I hadn't felt in a long time. "Are you heading out, or would you want to join me for a bit? It's not exactly the best weather out there." She glanced at the window, where the rain was picking up. After a brief pause, she smiled. "Sure, why not? I could use some company." We sat down at my table, and before long we were talking like old friends. Her name was Janice. She told me she was traveling west, taking a break from her hectic life in the city. She had this way of making even the smallest details seem interesting, and her laugh was like a balm to my weary soul. I couldn't help but notice the little things about her. The way she tilted her head slightly when she listened, the way she absent-mindedly traced patterns on her coffee cup with her finger. There was something about her, something magnetic that drew me in. By the time the rain began to let up, she stood to leave, and I knew I couldn't just let her walk out of my life. "Hey, before you go," I said, my voice hesitant, "can I give you my number? You know, in case you want to grab coffee again, or have another near-spill experience." She laughed, her smile lighting up the dim coffee shop. "Sure," she said, pulling out her phone. "But fair warning, I'm terrible at replying." From there, everything fell into place. She texted me later that evening, and our conversations became constant. We talked about everything, our favorite movies, the places we wanted to visit, our shared love of road trips. It was the first time in months that I felt a flicker of hope, a sense that things might actually get better. A week later, we decided to meet again. She suggested a diner in Albuquerque, not far from where I was staying. I couldn't shake my excitement as I arrived, but I tried to play it cool. She was already there, sitting in a booth by the window, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. The sight of her made me feel like I'd finally found something worth holding on to. The evening was perfect, or at least it started that way. We laughed, talked, and the connection felt even stronger in person. But as the night wore on and the other diners began to leave, something shifted. She seemed distracted, her eyes darting to the windows as if she were expecting someone to walk in. "You okay?" I asked, trying to lighten the mood. She forced a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Yeah, I'm fine, it's just... I don't know. I feel like we're being watched," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Her words sent a chill down my spine, but I shrugged it off. "It's late. Maybe the storm outside is just playing tricks on us," I said, glancing at the rain streaking down the windows. But deep down, I felt it too, an unshakable sense that something wasn't right. The date ended not long after that. She insisted on paying her share of the bill and left quickly, her demeanor tense and her goodbyes rushed. I told myself it was nothing, but over the next few days, everything changed. Her texts became shorter, less frequent, until one day they stopped altogether. I tried calling her, but the number was disconnected. Her social media accounts were gone. Every trace of her online presence had vanished. It didn't make sense. How could someone just disappear like that? I retraced my steps, going back to the coffee shop where we first met. The barista didn't remember her. I tried the diner, hoping the waitress might recognize her, but she just shook her head. "Sorry, hun, I don't remember anyone like that," she said with a polite smile. It was like Janice had never existed. I even went to the police, but without a last name or any solid details, there wasn't much they could do. "Maybe she just doesn't want to be found," the officer said, his tone dismissive. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been off that night at the diner. The way she looked over her shoulder, the tension in her voice. Had she been running from someone, hiding, or was there something else entirely going on? Now, whenever I drive through that stretch of Route 66, I think about her. I can still see her smile, hear her laugh, but I don't know if any of it was real. Was she just passing through my life like a ghost, here one moment and gone the next? I'll never know. But one thing's for sure, I'll never forget Janice, the girl who disappeared into the desert night. I've been a trucker for over a decade, driving long stretches of highway at all hours of the day and night. You get used to the solitude, the quiet hum of the engine, and the endless lines of asphalt that stretch on for miles. But no matter how experienced you are, sometimes something happens that shakes you to your core. This story happened on a cold, misty evening last fall, somewhere on a remote stretch of Highway 10 in northern Ontario, Canada. The sky had been darkening all day, and by the time I hit the road, the rain had started to come down in sheets. The truck was a second home to me, but on that night, it felt different, more isolated than usual. I was hauling a load of industrial supplies, and I'd been on the road for hours. It was around 2:30 in the morning when I passed the last gas station for miles. The visibility was poor due to the heavy rain, but I kept my speed steady, about 55 miles per hour. The truck was an older model, but I'd maintained it well, and I trusted it to carry me through. Somewhere between the long stretches of farmland and the woods, I noticed headlights in my rearview mirror. At first, it didn't seem out of the ordinary. After all, other trucks were always out at night, delivering goods. But as I glanced back again, I saw the headlights were much closer. Too close. I checked my mirrors and the side view, but saw no other vehicles. That's when I realized that the lights weren't coming from behind me, they were coming from beside me. There was no one there. The road was completely empty. I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me in the rain-soaked darkness, but the headlights kept pace, flickering just outside the corner of my vision. I tried to shake off the unease, but the feeling settled deep in my gut. I glanced out the window, half expecting to see another truck, but the highway was still deserted. The light beside me flickered again, but this time it was different. It wasn't just the reflection of my headlights. It was like there was something else, something trying to catch my attention. I slowed down, thinking maybe I was just too tired. As soon as I did, the light slowed down with me. As I sped up again, it matched my speed exactly. Now, I wasn't just paranoid. I was genuinely freaked out. I've seen plenty of odd things on the road, but this was something else. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was a trick of the mind, but the sensation of being followed, of something unseen tracking me, grew stronger. I pulled off the highway at the next exit, a small, unmarked road that led to a secluded truck stop. The lights from the highway flickered one last time as I turned, and I felt a strange sense of relief. I parked the truck under the dim glow of the truck stop's neon lights, took a deep breath and stepped outside for some fresh air. The mist had thickened, making everything around me feel even more oppressive. My boots crunched against the gravel as I walked toward the small diner that was open 24/7. The bell above the door jingled as I walked in. The place was nearly empty. Just one old man sitting in the corner booth with a coffee cup in front of him. The waitress, a middle-aged woman named Julie, gave me a warm, tired smile as I took a seat at the counter. "You're the only one tonight," she said, wiping down the counter. "Most of the trucks are stuck waiting out the storm further up the road." I ordered a coffee and tried to shake off the unease from the highway. As I waited for my drink, I couldn't help but notice the tension in the air. The wind was howling outside, and the rain was coming down in sheets against the windows. "So, you're a trucker?" Julie asked, trying to make conversation. "How's the road tonight?" I hesitated, not sure if I wanted to share what had happened, but there was something about the quiet diner, the flickering lights, and the sound of the rain that made it feel like I could talk about it without judgment. "Actually, I just had a weird experience on Highway 10, I said, taking a deep breath. "I was driving and I started seeing lights, headlights beside me, but no car. It kept pace with me for miles, like something was there, but I couldn't see it. It was like it was just waiting for me to notice." Julie's face shifted slightly, her eyes flicking to the window as if she was listening for something. "That's odd. Highway 10's got a reputation for strange things happening at night." My heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean, strange things?" She took a step back, her hand shaking slightly as she grabbed a coffee pot. "Oh, just things people don't talk about openly. Some people have seen stuff out there, heard things they can't explain. My husband's a trucker too. He's been driving that route for years. He tells me he's seen some odd stuff, but I don't ask him about it much." I looked at her, skeptical but intrigued. "Like what?" Julie hesitated for a long moment before leaning in a little. "There's a spot, a stretch of the highway about 50 miles north of here. Drivers say that sometimes they hear strange noises on the radio, like voices or static. Others say they've seen figures on the side of the road, people who shouldn't be there, but no one ever talks about it openly. You're not the first to mention something odd about Highway 10. I sat back in my seat, the unease creeping back. I knew that this was the same stretch of highway I had been on, the one I had turned off from just a few miles ago. Julie's words hung in the air, and the more I thought about it, the more it seemed like I wasn't just being paranoid. Something had been out there with me. The storm outside raged harder, and the wind howled against the diner's windows. I finished my coffee quickly, paid, and walked back to the truck. As I started the engine, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, even though the road was now empty. I didn't drive far that night. I stayed at the truck stop, watching the rain pour down in torrents, but I couldn't sleep. The thought of what Julie had said kept circling in my head, Was it just a coincidence, or was there something more to the stories about that stretch of highway? When the sun finally came up, the storm had passed. But I couldn't help but feel like something from that night had followed me, a lingering shadow just out of sight, waiting for the next trucker to come along. It was supposed to be a simple weekend road trip. 4 college friends, a borrowed car, and a cabin in the middle of nowhere. We were excited to escape campus life for a couple of days, enjoy some fresh air, and forget about exams. The drive from our university in Colorado to the rented cabin in Utah was supposed to take about 6 hours, but we made a mistake, a big one, and it's a miracle we made it back. The group consisted of me, Alex, my best friend Nate, his girlfriend Megan, and our other friend Tara. We were all piled into Nate's beat-up Subaru, the trunk stuffed with coolers, bags, and sleeping gear. Spirits were high as we left town, blasting music and laughing about the dumbest things. The highway stretched out in front of us, endless and straight, with the mountains looming in the distance. For the first few hours, everything went smoothly. We stopped for snacks at a gas station and took turns driving while the others napped or talked. By late afternoon, we were halfway there, and the GPS told us we'd arrive at the cabin just after sunset. That's when Tara had an idea. "Hey, check this out," she said, holding her phone up from the back seat. "There's a shortcut here that'll save us almost an hour. It cuts through some back roads and reconnects to the main highway near the state line." Nate, who was driving at the time, glanced at the phone. "Are you sure? I don't want to get us lost in the middle of nowhere." "Come on," Tara said with a grin. "What's the worst that could happen? It's just a shortcut. Besides, it'll be cool to drive through some real wilderness." We all agreed, mostly because we were eager to get to the cabin and start the weekend. The idea of saving time sounded great. So Nate took the next exit, and we left the main highway for a 2-lane road that wound through the foothills. At first it wasn't bad. The scenery was beautiful, with rolling fields and patches of forest stretching out in every direction. The road was quiet, no other cars, just us and the fading light of day. We even joked about how off the beaten path we were and how it felt like an adventure. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, the road began to change. The smooth pavement gave way to cracks and potholes, and the trees on either side grew thicker, casting long shadows across the road. The GPS signal started cutting out, and the directions became spotty. Still, we pressed on, figuring we'd reconnect with the main highway soon enough. That's when we saw the car. It was an old sedan parked on the side of the road with its hazard lights flashing. The hood was up, and there was a man standing next to it, waving his arms as we approached. He looked disheveled, with messy hair and a torn jacket, and his face was hard to make out in the dim light. "Should we stop?" Megan asked, leaning forward in her seat. "He looks like he needs help." "I don't know," Nate said, gripping the wheel tightly. "It's kind of sketchy. There's no one else around, and this road isn't exactly well traveled." "But what if he's stranded?" Tara chimed in. "We can at least ask if he needs to borrow a phone or something." Against his better judgment, Nate slowed the car and pulled over a few feet ahead of the sedan. The man jogged toward us, his hands raised as if to show he meant no harm. He was middle-aged, with deep lines on his face and eyes that darted nervously. "Thanks for stopping," he said, slightly out of breath. "My car broke down and I've been stuck here for hours. I don't have a signal to call for help. Can I borrow your phone?" Nate glanced at me, and I could tell he was uncomfortable. Something about the man felt off. His story made sense, but there was a tension in his voice that didn't sit right. Still, we didn't want to be rude, or worse, leave someone in real trouble. "Yeah, sure," Nate said reluctantly, handing the man his phone. "There's no signal out here, though." The man took the phone and frowned, shaking his head. "No signal," he muttered. "Figures. Do you think you could give me a ride to the next town? It's not far from here." Now the unease in the car was palpable. The nearest town had to be at least 30 miles away, and none of us liked the idea of picking up a stranger in the middle of nowhere. Nate hesitated, clearly torn. "We're kind of in a rush," he said carefully, "but maybe we can flag someone down for you once we get back to the main highway." The man's expression changed. His smile faltered, and for a moment, his eyes darkened. "You can't just leave me here," he said, his voice low. "You don't understand what's out here." Before we could respond, a noise came from the woods, a rustling sound, followed by a low, guttural growl. We all froze, staring at the dark tree line. The man's face turned pale and he took a step back. "They're coming," he whispered. "What the hell is he talking about?" Tara said, her voice shaking. "Get in the car," the man shouted suddenly, his panic infectious. "If you want to live, you need to leave now." Nate didn't wait for an explanation. He slammed the car into drive, and we sped off down the road, leaving the man and his broken-down car behind. My heart was racing, and the tension in the car was unbearable. No one spoke for a long time, the only sound the roar of the engine and the rain that had started to fall. Finally, Megan broke the silence. "What just happened? What was he talking about?" "I don't know," Nate said, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "But I wasn't about to stick around to find out." As we rounded a bend, we saw something in the road ahead, another car, abandoned and mangled as if it had been in a crash. We slowed down, our headlights illuminating deep claw marks on the hood and shattered windows. The inside was empty, but the sight was enough to send us into full panic mode. Nate floored it, and we didn't stop until we reached the main highway hours later. None of us could explain what we saw that night, but we all agreed on one thing. We'd never take a shortcut through the back roads again. It was supposed to be a typical road trip with friends, just a weekend getaway to unwind and escape the demands of college life. We had spent months talking about it, planning our route, picking the music we'd play, and even the snacks we'd bring. It was supposed to be fun, but none of us could have imagined how one unexpected stop on a desolate stretch of Highway 15 would change everything. It started with me, Brandon, and Jason, 3 college friends heading from Los Angeles, California, toward a small cabin we had rented near the Sierra Nevada mountains. We were all in good spirits, laughing and joking around as the car hummed down the road. But as dusk began to settle, we found ourselves on an unfamiliar stretch of the highway, one that had fewer cars and little to no signs of life for miles. The drive was smooth at first, the scenery peaceful as we passed through sparse forests, the fading orange glow of sunset reflecting off distant peaks. But about 2 hours into the drive, Jason started complaining about the radio. "This station sucks," he muttered, trying to adjust the dials, but all he could pick up were static-filled channels and fuzz. I wasn't too concerned about it, but I could tell Jason wasn't enjoying the silence. Brandon, who had been behind the wheel for the past few hours, pulled off to the side of the road when we saw a small gas station up ahead. It seemed to appear out of nowhere, just a small rundown place with flickering lights and no cars around. "This should be good for a pit stop," Brandon said, easing the car into the parking lot. We had been on the road for hours and we needed fuel anyway. The station was clearly old with rusted pumps and a poorly lit store. I didn't expect much, but I was relieved that there was something here. It was so quiet though, almost too quiet. The only sound was the soft whistle of the wind through the trees. We parked near the entrance, and as Jason got out to stretch his legs, I noticed something strange. The lights inside the station seemed dim, but flickered intermittently. There was no sound of people, no voices, nothing. It almost felt like an abandoned place, even though the gas pumps seemed to be working. "Hey, do you think this place is open?" I asked, looking around. The small bell hanging above the door didn't ring when Jason pushed it open. "I'll check inside," Jason called back. I stood there for a moment, watching Jason walk into the store. It felt off, but I couldn't quite explain why. I turned to Brandon. "It's weird, right? Like this place shouldn't even be here." Brandon was already filling the tank, glancing around but shrugging it off. "I don't know, maybe it's just a quiet part of the highway. Small towns don't need a lot of people to stay open." I wanted to ask him more, but at that moment, Jason came back out of the store with a puzzled look on his face. "Something's wrong," Jason said quietly, not making eye contact. "I don't think this place is really open." "What do you mean?" I asked, feeling an uneasy chill settle over me. "There's fuel here, and the lights are on." "I don't know," Jason said. "It's just the cashier. She's not talking, just staring at me. It feels like she's waiting for something." That's when I looked at Brandon, who had finished fueling the car and was now wiping his hands on a rag. "Let's just get back on the road. We're not here to hang out with some creepy lady." But before I could react, I heard the sound of footsteps behind us. Turning around, I saw a woman, middle-aged, wearing a faded green apron and dark sunglasses. She wasn't moving fast, but she was coming toward us, her steps deliberate. Her face was expressionless, and there was a strange, unnerving stillness to her movements. I didn't say anything, but I felt a heavy knot form in my stomach. The last thing we needed was to be caught up in some weird situation at an isolated gas station in the middle of nowhere. "Hey, do you need something?" Brandon asked, trying to break the tension with his usual friendly demeanor. The woman didn't respond right away. She just stood there for a moment, her head tilted slightly as if studying us. Then, in a soft voice, she said, "I'm sorry, but I can't let you leave yet." We all froze. Jason looked around nervously, but the woman didn't seem threatening, just strange. Still, I felt my heart rate increase. "What are you talking about?" I asked, voice a little sharper than I intended. "We're just here to get some fuel and go." The woman didn't move, but her lips curled into an odd, almost sad smile. "It's not safe out there," she said, her tone almost like a whisper. "Not anymore. There's something out there, watching." I tried to laugh it off, but her gaze was unwavering. "What's watching?" I asked, trying to sound skeptical but feeling more unsettled by the second. But the woman didn't answer. Instead, she just slowly turned around, walking back toward the station. Her movements were stiff, unnatural, and the door of the gas station slammed shut behind her. I looked at Brandon and Jason, my confusion mirroring their own. What was that about? Why had she said that? I felt like something was off, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Without saying another word, we all piled into the car and got back on the road. As we left the station, I glanced at the rearview mirror, seeing the gas station's lights fade into the distance, but as we drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone anymore. Somewhere between our conversation and the final stretch of the highway, the mood had changed. There was something different about the road. It was darker now, and the stillness seemed to press against us like a weight. We were almost at our destination when Brandon's voice broke the silence. "Did you guys hear that?" We all went quiet. I strained my ears but couldn't hear anything. The road was empty, not a soul in sight. "That sound," Brandon continued, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. "It's like someone following us." Jason immediately turned around, his eyes scanning the rear window. "I don't see anything." I looked too, and my heart dropped. The headlights barely illuminated the road behind us, but there was something, someone, walking along the shoulder of the highway, slowly, deliberately. I felt a wave of nausea hit me as I turned to Brandon. "Speed up. Get us out of here." We hit the gas, speeding down the highway, but the feeling that we were being followed never left. The last few miles were a blur, and by the time we pulled into the cabin's driveway, we couldn't shake the unease that had crept into our bones. We never spoke about it again, but every time I drive alone through a quiet stretch of highway, I can't help but wonder about that woman and who or what was walking behind us that night.